Hello, welcome to the meeting tent. My name is Bill Haber, and once again, we're talking about the work of Stan Tenen. And joining us today is our usual cast of characters, Levanah Tenen, Daniel Gill, and Michael Andron. So today we promised in several episodes to talk about the inverted T, why that's important, how it was a crucial part of Stan's research. And we're going to, in Stan's words, find out how it came about. But before we do that, I want to show a portion of a video. We showed some of this last time, A Prayer for Peace. It's on the meruvideo.com website. And a lot of times over the past, the way we describe this, or the way it was described by others, was this was kind of combining Jewish tradition or Jewish studies with science. So let's hear what Stan has to say about that, because this is the basis of his research.
This is not science per se, but it's making use of the scientific method, which differs from what scholars and business people do and everyone else. In the business world, in the everyday world, we put our theories on the table and we try to prove them. And we stand up for them and we give a lot of strong support for our ideas. Scientists are persnickety. The scientific method is in part based on what's called Popperian falsifiability. Popper was a philosopher of science, and he said, what you do is you put a thesis forward, and then you have all your colleagues, and you marshal all your own means to disprove your thesis. You throw stones at it, you chip away at it. It's kind of like Sherlock Holmes. When you cut away all the things that don't work, what's left does work. So what I've done is put hypotheses on the table in front of me, in front of others, and attempted to present them and then criticize them. What's wrong with this? What's incomplete? Why isn't it good enough? That's why we got rid of the light in the meeting tent and went on and found the hand model. The light in the meeting tent, as I describe in the book, was a wonderful idea. Symmetry and asymmetry, a flame and a tetrahedron. It fills all kinds of discussions, but there's no personal experience. And without personal experience, you couldn't be sure it was real. I couldn't be sure. So this is the use of the scientific method. You put a proposal on the table, it's a little vortex in a tetrahedron, and you criticize it. Well, it's wonderful. It makes all the letters, but it doesn't make them in any particular order, and there's no personal experience.
So the scientific method, that's not something a lot of people are familiar with. Certainly I wasn't. We're used to trying to prove things. In other words, you come up with an idea, and Michael, you've done a lot of research, and I don't know what your methods are, but if you come up with an idea, you want to go and find things to enhance it, or maybe not even to prove it, but just to exemplify what you're saying. So this idea of trying to disprove it is something foreign to me. And you have to be a dedicated researcher to do that. I mean, think of all the time you have to spend, and Stan's finding a theory and trying to show that, and I think a lot of it had to do with Stan's motivation, because I got the impression early on that Stan really was trying to reach people like himself, skeptical, technical. And I know in the early days, he was meeting up with people in that realm. I think there was a video that he did at the Stanford Research Institute in the 80s. And then I guess when it became too rabbinic or, Talmudic or however you want to label it, too Jewish, then people backed away. Um, but his motivation was to get to people who were like him, skeptical, and that's a good thing. There are the light in the mean tent is a perfect example. Here is this beautiful image, this whole concept, and people were coming and really, just um, glomming onto this idea. And this was a time when people were coming out with all kinds of theories. And, during the New Age period of the 80s and 90s. And a good example is a book that came out, I guess it was in the 90s, called Codes in Torah. You probably remember it. And what it did was it demonstrated skip patterns that Stan had been talking about, where no word divisions. And the thesis was that you could extract portions of it, and there was prophecy in those portions. And it was pretty impressive. I mean, gee, that was, the guy's coming up with all this, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. Well, what happened to that? Where'd it go? What good did it do us? And so Stan could have come out with this light in the meaning 10 model, demonstrated, and I've said this before, how it casts shadows, and just built a business on that one model. But no, he was not, it didn't do anything. It didn't provide the inner feelings that we've talked about. And so he went further. Are any of you familiar with this concept of this kind of research?
I know that I've experienced this kind of thing, and even as you asked it, it occurred to me that, in working in theater, and I suspect this is probably going to be true for Dan in music as well, you play something and it just doesn't sit right. Now, you can't call it disproving it as such, but you look at it and you work with it for a while, and it's not, there's a feeling that you get in the non-scientific world. There's a feeling you get when you hit it, when it's right and it's right. And I'd be working in the healing arts, and an idea pops into your head, and that's like full blown, and you say, let's try that. And it doesn't work. And you can't be too precious with it. Mm-hmm. I suspect, I mean, I wasn't there during that period, certainly, but I can imagine, because he was very into the light in the meeting tent, that at a certain point, to let that go as the center focal point of where he wanted to go, that's not easy. That's where the scientist, the dreamer is going to say, well, I can't really let that go. Mm-hmm. But, you look at Picasso in this period and that period in his life, he did something, he worked with it, and he got to a certain point where he said, this is not fulfilling to me now. This is not working the way I want it to work. And it's just a little more tightly bound in scientific method, where in a sense you're trying to prove something, but you're also trying to disprove something almost at the same time. You know what you want, so in that sense you're trying to make it work, and then it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And you got to be able to say, okay, I'll keep you on the shelf because I may come back to you when I understand you better. But in the meantime, we have to solve the problem. We have to get to where we want to go, and you go to something else. So I can relate to it artistically.
How does this differ from what Edison did in terms of inventing the light bulb? And if you've ever seen this story where he just kept over and over and over, and it wouldn't work, and then he'd come up with another thing. Is that the same thing? That's not disproving it.
It's close. I mean, I think I probably mentioned last week that just in terms of the various models, physical models that Stanley made in order to try and help him visualize and explore different relationships that he was exploring, I've got boxes and boxes of models that didn't quite work. So in that sense, it was the same thing. The specific transition with the light in the meeting tent, what was always not quite right about that for him, from his perspective, is that he felt that that there should be some recognizable and meaningful method to going from one orientation of the model, which displayed the letters, to the next. And he explored that with the light in the meeting tent many different ways, and he could never, he could find maybe 4 letters here, 5 letters there, but he could never walk through the whole alphabet. And so that was always not satisfying to him. And then in the book, it relates the experience that he had, and which we've talked about, with the model in your hands and the apple, and and actually looking at the letters as they were displayed. When he held his hands in a position that exemplified the meaning of the actual letter. That was a major breakthrough in terms of his speculative thought. He experimented with that idea for maybe a year, trying to find the most elegant way that he could find to express each letter in an elegant way. Elegance is a really important word for him. To express each letter according to its meaning. And eventually, I think it was in 1991, you came over and recorded the Dance of the Letters video, which was his first time that he actually demonstrated those letters publicly, after working on them for quite some time before that. And both the position of the letters and his sense of the meaning, he continually refined them over decades, until they were ready to show to people like Idelle, who is taking her own flight with the letters and the gestures in a way that she, as a dancer and choreographer, she's really uniquely qualified to explore that particular way of seeing the matrix of letters and letter meanings, all of which goes to say that he had a sense from the very beginning of what constituted an elegant system for having the letters generated from a single meaningful form. And ultimately, the light in the meeting tent never met those criteria.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
It bothered me when I read it, and then it bothered me when, I didn't bother me, but the thought that went through my head is, but I see that in the light in the tent. It's not, he found another way of expressing it that satisfied him, but it wasn't like the light in the meeting tent was gone, because even the hand model essentially followed the flame in the meeting tent.
Yeah, he didn't fully reject that
shape.
I actually have something to say to that, which is that a few years ago, and I just came across this in a voice memo, and I haven't yet transcribed it, but he finally came to a conclusion that he could identify the light in the meeting tent as a particle of consciousness, I believe is what he said, but Honestly, I don't have that paper and I don't have that thing in front of me, and I would like to offer what he actually said. So he never rejected the model entirely, but it didn't satisfy what he was actually looking for.
Right.
What he was looking for wasn't the letters. What he was looking for was a coherent system.
The meanings.
And the idea of having the central model be something which was separated from an internal human consciousness, which was only external.
That's it though, because for me, I in my parallel track, I was doing this all from a meditative consciousness kind of thing, and I didn't see the big gap, and that's probably why he had to have a model in front of him to satisfy him. It had to, because he was grounded in his engineering part of his brain. He wanted to have that there. It didn't bother me as much as it seemed to bother him in reading the book.
But how do you get from the light in the meeting tent to the kind of physical full body expression, right, the letters that Idelle is doing? Well, the light in the meeting tent is essentially external to a person instead of having it be surrounding the person.
I remember one of my first conversations with Stan, and I think this is really relevant. He said, the Hebrew letters really represent these kind of fundamental, like almost like cosmic emotions. And the basic idea, as he explained it, was if we could do a meditation together on the letters in the Torah and read the letters as a series of these elevated emotions, then we could bring into the world the consciousness of the Messianic age. And so I don't think you can get that just by looking at the light in the meeting tent. It has to be, and I think this was actually one of the things that as a musician I went, wow, like that's really important. Like the and this goes along with it. The structure and the content are complementary. Neither one is kind of the thing. And so the structure of the deep mathematics and the deep kind of patterns are there to serve this elevating of consciousness. And you can't do that without a conscious being. And I think that's the significance of the hand model, is that it brings it right to the person so that they can experience those emotions.
It may be in the communicating of it. See, I got it right away. I saw that in that because that's how I was confronting it. But if you have to bring it to the point of music or to the point of dance or the point of art or any of those things, then that person would have to make that jump in their own medium.
Right. And anyone else, maybe some people who aren't necessarily,
right.
No, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
As we know, the hand model became a dynamic and multi-dimensional. It had so many things to offer us that the meeting tent model didn't. What the meeting tent model represented to me was a beautiful, just a great image. I know that, Levanah, somewhere you have a clear case with that little wire model. It's a beautiful piece of art, if nothing else. And
did you move it?
Pardon me?
Did you move it? Did you?
Oh,
move
I don't
it
have
and,
it.
No. I'm not. I don't mean that.
Yeah, okay.
When you saw it, do you imagine it yourself inside of it? Do you imagine yourself outside of it? Do you imagine it returning and doing those things?
You could do that.
But, I mean,
ultimately, he did with the hand model.
Right.
He took
the idea.
It seems like he took the flame and brought it into a three-dimensional world.
He took that flame and integrated it with his own being as best we can. I mean, ultimately, whether you're a meditator or not, we are still physical human beings. We're here. And so, in a sense, to anchor this thing, you need as a person to be at the center and to have your arms, or if you're fluent with your body, which Stanley was not, your whole body reflect the meaning that you are feeling as you are gesturing and seeing the letter, whether directly in your hand or some of the letter positions that he derived. Yes, you do have to be basically seeing through the eyes in the back of your head. So you have to have that imagination and you have to have that visualization. But actually physically having the model on your hand, it does something to the brain.
Yeah, there's a connection between the hand and the brain.
Yeah.
You pointed that out.
That physical connection, at some point when you visit, you'll be able to put the models actually on your hand. I can remember back in the very early days when we had just found this idea, we went in, there is or was a school of Qigong in the city. And, you know, the guy said, "Oh, can I try that?" Put it on his hand, and he just went bananas with it. Obviously, somebody who is extremely experienced at the internal visualization, meditation, whatever you want to call it, but having the physical model on his hand, again, the neural connections to the hand are very, very dense. There's a lot of them.
100%.
The hand is extremely important. And when you feel it, it does something. And that's basically as God, you and Idelle haven't felt, well, no, Idelle felt the model because she visited here. You're like the only person we're working with now who hasn't.
That's
So,
frustrating. Yeah.
I don't know.
First of all, I am not at all surprised that you found a Qigong place in San Francisco. That would
Right.
seem to be the place to go. But number two, I think you used a word a minute ago that I think really is the answer to my question.
Okay, I had no idea.
And that was anchored.
Ah,
The hand
okay.
model anchored the flame in the tent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I sort of bypassed that because I had the Qigong, I had the Tai Chi Chuan, I had the movements of the hands. And I was aware from a healing perspective how important this area of the hand is in terms of
that's true.
its application. And the researcher that I worked with made a clear point that the optical rotatory properties of amino acids in the hands were different than almost any other part of the body. What that means exactly, I have no idea, but I'm giving it to you word for what he said. But I sort of, yes, I totally get that one anchored the other.
And
So-
that it helps to make it personal.
Right.
Yes.
And that allows people, in my opinion, that's part of what allows people like Idelle or like Daniel to explore this realm in the particular milieu of the Hebrew letters and meaning. It allows people to let themselves feel what's going on, and to let themselves personally learn what's going on. Okay, I understand why the word anchor got, I was thinking that, and I understand that would make that now I understand after using that word.
And I've always
that makes sense for you.
I've always really liked the image of the meeting tent. I'm glad he called it that. Obviously the first thing that comes to mind is in the Torah, and Moses went to the tent of meeting and Aaron went to the tent of meeting. It was a space that we could relate to. We're using it now.
There's another thing that's really important here, which is that, and I think this goes to the concept of toho kavaro. The inside is the same as the outside. Very important concept to Stan. And I think this is kind of at the heart of it. Whereas in the external world, I've had this discussion recently with a couple people, like from different points of view. In the external world, if you're successful, then what you're doing is good. You're kind of judged by if you're successful or not. And in the internal world, precisely the opposite is true. Like if it's good, it's good. And if it's not, it doesn't matter what kind of success it has or what kind of monetary value it has. And I think that that goes back to this essential idea, the spiritual idea, that each person is their own world. You know, like there's the external world, and it is indeed very important. But there's the person and their world, and that's equally as important. And so, you know, I think that shows, again, Toko Kavara. I mean, Stan was, you know, really, really, in a sense, very focused on the truth and on the internal world, the very thing being good, like unto itself, and hoping for you know, spreading it and showing people an external recognition, of course, but that wasn't never the point.
That was not his motivation
ever. Yeah.
Emmett was his motivation.
Yeah, truth.
It's still success. It's not an opposite.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not monetized.
Oh, 100, exactly, 100%.
Toko Kavara meant integrity, just to stand inside and outside. I think he quoted Rabbi Akiva in terms of inside and outside is one that equals integrity.
And just as an aside, in rabbinics, this concept has to do with democracy and the importance of democracy and of preserving minority opinions as valid. Interestingly enough,
Not happening today, is it?
yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the inverted T. This was a great discussion. We could have probably filled another hour with it, but I do want to get to this this next part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and share the screen again, and we'll find out where that actually came from.
Most of what we're talking about is based on a kind of humility, a kind of willingness to believe that this is a wonderful universe, and we're good creatures, but we're not always good, and we're not perfect, and there's always more to learn. And sometimes you have to go into territory that is not comfortable. But if you're honest, you have to do it. And if you're not honest, then you don't get the best result. I spent thousands of hours just staring at shapes, reading textbooks and all kinds of theories about what's important about different things. And there are many teachings that apply to the Golden Rule. The rabbis say, they say that when Hillel was asked if he could present what he could explain what Torah is while standing on one foot, that would be desirable. So this is what Hillel said when challenged to do that. And the story may be apocryphal, but this is the story that comes down. Is that if you're asked what is the foundational principles of Torah, what is the summary of the work, he said, don't do to others what's hateful to yourself. A version of the Golden Rule, and there are many different versions. We talk about that in the book in some detail. Why is the Golden Rule so important, so central? Philosophers and scientists agree. Artists agree that the golden proportion shows up in many places. The golden proportion is an analytic representation of part of the Golden Rule. And more recently, I've realized that there's more than one Golden Rule. I was only looking at one. And that's the one on the first poster that I came up. I was thinking about what is the geometry that represents the Golden Rule. Don't do to others what's hateful to yourself, or do unto others. But that one, I couldn't get any place with that. It was too complicated. So I went to the Hermetic version, which is also in Kabbalah, as above, so below. There's a principle in heaven, in the abstract higher realm, that when you apply it, produces a similar principle in human experience on the earth plane. As above, so below. And as I drew on the poster, the first thing I thought of was, well, the obvious thing, as above, so below, is you take an image, a simple image, and you write it above and you write it below it. You duplicate it. So it could be a point on top of a point, or a line with a parallel line above and a parallel line below. And so there's a line above and a line below. You don't get anything from that. It's not productive. So I literally, I'm trying to remember now, it was hundreds of hours. I just ran it through my mind. How can you represent as above, so below in a more elegant and meaningful way than just a couple of parallel lines. And I ended up with the phrase, the one going upward is the same as the whole going under. That if you look up, there's a single principle of the one, and there should be a corresponding principle below it that is the whole story. One above and whole below. And I ended up drawing an inverted T with a vertical line over a horizontal line. The one going up is the vertical line, reaching to God, to the transcendent. And the one below is like the earth plane. It's like represents the ground we stand on. And then it hit me. But a vertical line on top of a horizontal line in an inverted T, that vertical line is metaphorically like a foot standing on the earth. It's Torah on one foot. This is the image that corresponds to what Hillel said.
The Torah on one foot, that's something that we're all familiar with. Most people who study any kind of Jewish liturgy or history or philosophy know about Rabbi Hillel's statement of Torah on one foot. What do any of you have any thoughts on that, on Rabbi Hillel's statement, or have you delved into that at all? Has it come across your studies or desk or research at any point? That idea?
Well, the funny thing about Hillel is we unfortunately live in a world of shammais. If Hillel was around now, they would put him in cherem. They would they would kick him out of Judaism for such a radical approach to conversion. Immediately. It's just interesting. But that being aside, there are reasons for that too historically. But it doesn't make it right. But it's a and I see this a lot in the music world. There are tremendous composers. People who just rock the world of composition, who are absolutely horrible people, monsters, demons. You'd never want anything to do with them. You would kick them off your property immediately. Put a cordon or go away. A lot of them, and there were some who were not, who were good people. But in the strictly below world, they're as above, their morality, their caring for others or lack thereof, or their cruelty doesn't matter. Then I could rattle off names for you of people who were really, really bad people who were great composers. And in the world of composition, in general, it's starting to matter a little bit, but in general, it doesn't matter. And so what's beautiful about this in terms of scholarship in general, and any field, is that as above, so below. It's really great if you make great discoveries and you do great things, but if you're not kind to people and you're cruel, ultimately it really doesn't matter what you did. And I feel like Stan, that was he really, really walked the walk with this one. He was such a kind person, and at the same time did this incredible research and did all this stuff.
So
It's not to say that he was always patient.
Well, he was human. Yeah.
But it was something that he aspired to in his whole life, just as, it's life should be like this, and therefore I aspire to it.
Yeah.
Same kind of impulse that caused him to say in the beginning, where we were talking about the light in the meeting tent transferred to the hand, that, I need this nugget of good. I need this consistency. It's not good enough unless it integrates me. That was the hand. And so I wanted to add one thing about his rewording of that Hermetic golden rule, as above, so below. It's after however many decades, it suddenly just crystallized for me. Something that he always insisted on in terms of the meaning of Hebrew letters was to tend towards thinking of them as verbs, not nouns. They were all processes, all verbs. Well, wait a minute. What he just did with the as above, so below was the same thing. It says, okay, life is process. Life always moves. So what does this maxim look like if you're saying, going above, going under? What does it look like? That's the verb form, which he was always looking for.
Yeah, Stan.
That's amazing. Oh, yeah.
I get Stan had a kind of an innocence about him, and he was very idealistic about the world. And I'm not. I mean, I was more of a realist, and you know, and it was sad in some ways because things didn't quite go the way they should have in his world, and it kind of ties into what I read last week from the 5 things he wished he had known sooner. And you know, the world just wasn't the way it should have been, kind of, you know, falling into what Daniel was just talking about. You know, and the other thing I wanted to say was growing up in the US, we kind of grew up with this, the golden rule was do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And you know, you thought about that a lot, you know, growing up, and yeah, you know, people don't really do that, but maybe they should. And so when I first heard Rabbi Hillel's version from the other perspective, it made so much more sense, because do unto others, you're kind of expressing your will upon other people. Whereas, you know, especially in business, well, if you don't want to be cheated in business, don't cheat the other person. You know, if you don't want somebody to steal from you, then don't steal from somebody else. And there's a bit of karma involved in that. Yeah, Levanah.
And more than, yes, there's a bit of karma in that way of expressing it. This was something that Stan and I actually thought about a whole lot. And the way it seems to me is that do unto others involves making assumptions about other people that we really have no right to make. Don't do to other people what you don't want to have done to yourself. At least limits the scope of what you're offering to what you actually know. And some of what you actually know may be, okay, I want people to listen to me, so I need to listen to this person if they tell me they need some particular thing that seems way off the table for me, but that's what they need. So it's not as it would have done for me. It's don't do to others. Don't assume that I know what they're thinking. It's a posture that includes humility. And whereas do unto others kind of doesn't.
Exactly. That's exactly the perspective I had. You know, when you first hear it, you think, well, it's kind of a negative perspective, but it really isn't. It's exactly what you're saying. It's really how you want to be treated in the world. Stan definitely saw the inverted T as an expression of Rabbi Hillel's perspective, you know, saying. Let's see. I think he talks about that. Let me play a little bit more here.
This is when I realized that this particular geometry was probably what they were referring to in the story about Hillel. This was a picture in elegant, geometric, pristine form of Torah on 1 foot. The 1 foot is the vertical line, and the horizontal line is the earth plane that stands on. And if that was a conjecture. Now, what did I just say? We use the scientific method. We tried to destroy it, prove it's not true. But the more I researched it, the more it made sense. The more detail I got, the more historical discussion I read, the more discussion of what Hillel meant I read, the more I was convinced that that's what they were referring to. It wasn't standing literally on 1 foot. It was an elegant geometric model of the geometry of as above, so below, represented by standing on 1 foot, a vertical line over a horizontal line, and it's an inverted T.
I wanted to stop on this one graphic here. Once again, when we're talking about the inverted T, we've been showing it in one dimension, but these are expressions in the other dimensions. So that in some cases, we're looking at it as a circle, a sphere. The Bose-Einstein condensate, which Michael had referred to previously, and we can explore later, was a perfect example of the inverted T in 4 dimensions. I mean, it's a complex subject, and you have to go into a lot of explanation. Some of this is in the book, but Stan continued on this path after the book was published, and so the inverted T showed up in a lot of other examples.
Bill,
Yeah.
just a thought on this.
Yeah, let me.
The part that gets the really big discussion is, of course, first of all, the expression "while you're standing on one foot" is actually has become just a colloquial expression, a regular hat. Do this quick, like hip hop to it. That wasn't Hillel's statement. The guy came to him and said, "Tell me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one foot." The part that doesn't get explicated quite as much are the second 2 parts of what Hillel says. And the picture, the graphic you had up there just a second ago, is a perfect example of that. Number 1, all the rest is commentary. He's not saying that's it. I mean, how does don't kill, don't steal, keep Shabbos, keep the holidays, how does all of that stuff become commentary from that? Okay, so that's part 1, because God's going to be open to you, but humanity makes things difficult sometimes. And so that which is hateful to you, don't do unto them. At least you'll be able to establish a level of peace, coexistence with other people. And then the part that gets completely ignored are the last 2 words of what he said, which is Zilgmor, go learn. Which is literally walk and learn, but also finish. The Gmor is to finish. Okay. If you really want to get the whole picture of this, get on your Dow, walk along, and complete the process. Okay. You're not going to get it from one clever little saying. And that picture shows it. It says, just from a purely graphic point of view, to start with a T and end up with the Bose-Einstein condensate is a pretty long walk. I mean, that's not something you just happen to come across. It took Einstein, to be able to put that together. And I think that's a big deal. That it's a way of transforming yourself. Okay. How do you get your own act together? Well, if you don't like this being done to you, don't do it to anybody else. That's already a life transformation. If you can live that, that's a big deal.
It's a big deal.
And then to take the graphics going one way and the ethics and the musar, the way of living going another way, and the different levels of scholarship.
Yeah.
I mean, I could not answer the question that I'm going to pose to you, Dan, is how do you take that which is hateful to you, don't do it to anybody else, into music? I have no idea. All I know is if I were a music person, as I try and understand the music mind, I would say I'd have the same trouble that he had in trying to find a graphic, that said exactly what he wanted to say. How do you do that in music?
Well,
How do you do it in
music's all about,
dance?
it's all about listening. It's all about what you're hearing.
But it's expression and listening. It's a two-way thing. And that's tough.
Well, you get into, that's a good question. Yeah, that's very interesting what you said. And I think
hold on, Dan, you're kind of in the dark. I don't know what, maybe.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I just kind of.
Okay. All right.
I can turn on a light if you want. Hold on.
Well, it's the front.
Hold on.
I think what happened was your screen was bright and then, that's
that
better.
might be better.
That's a little better.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry
That's
to
a little
interrupt.
better. Yeah, no, it's okay. No, it's one of the things you realize is that, you have to, and any type of scholar, someone who's, diligently and deeply, seriously studying something or working on something, you have to follow the path. You have to keep working. It's like, you make a beautiful composition. You can say, well, that's it. I'm good. I'm done. Thank you. But it's good. You should be proud of yourself. What do you do next? You make another thing, you work, you go to another level. Then, again and again and again and again, we go from level to level. And I think that's the going up. But the interesting thing in terms of music or any sort of scholarship, I think it really does have to do with keeping in mind what's hateful to you. A lot of scholarship is simply showing how great you are, how smart you are, how clever you are. Like, oh, look how good I am. Look what I figured out, and that's for music too. But that avoids the whole point of it, which is what is hateful to you? What don't you like? Which, of course, opens up what you really do like. And so writing successful music is thinking about what I like and what I don't like and acting accordingly on that truth. And really, and this gets back to, again, Toko Kavaro. I might listen to something and I go, yeah, it's good enough, but like you said earlier, like something about it, it's not quite right, Or sometimes you go, I know technically this is not right, but it's exactly right because that's what I like, And so then when you write like that, then people who listen to it tend to go, oh, that was moving, or that was interesting, or that touched me, or that had some effect because, you're keeping in mind what you like and what you don't like. And there is a universality, I think, believe it or not, I think, to the human heart and to the human condition. It's also in a technical way in music, you really need to pay attention to how you think people might be perceived. A lot of the time I'll look at the score or I'll think about it and I'll say, well, how will that feel from the perspective of the audience? How long do I keep that dissonance going before the audience says, well, I'm bored, and they start falling asleep, or how long do I keep the consonants going until they go, well, that's really nice. It's like a lullaby. Thank you very much. How often do you change? So that's also kind of a technical answer is you want to keep in mind yourself, the players, and the audience all at the same time.
Music is so subjective, and I know well, maybe let's not get.
Yeah, we'll let it go.
Yeah. Did you have another thought, Michael?
Yeah. This is the character Tao.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you have a letter Shin on top here, coming down. It's the Shefa Tao. It's that condensed point of light from God, and you bring it down into your heart and to the different levels of your soul. And then over here, you got a man walking along the way.
Mm-hmm.
That's the Tao. That's the way. And it's a vertical and a horizontal. If you just look at the guy over here on this side, okay, he's trying to get the whole thing is his inside. That little tiny point over here, the head, is what's going on inside of his head and his soul. And then he can walk along. And the very first paragraph of the Tao Te Ching echoes about 5 things we talked about today. Existence is beyond the power of words to define. Terms may be used, but none of them are absolute. In the beginning of heaven and earth, there were no words. Words came out of the womb of matter. And whether a man dispassionately sees to the core of life or passionately sees the surface, the core and the surface are essentially the same. Words making them seem different only to express appearance. Only if name be needed, wonder names them both. From wonder into wonder, existence opens. Think of the chart that you had up there right before we came back to our faces. There's something out there that we can't put into words. And as it comes down this and comes into the multiplicity at the base, at the horizontal line into the world we live in, the expressions of it are as many as every single person. And that should work well, except when people's egos get in the way and what is hateful to them, they do unto other people, because that's the way they protect themselves and they put up their armor. But as I see it, what Stan was envisioning, and he talks about it at the end of the book, as I mentioned last time when I picked my favorite portion of what was in there, he's talking about a world that lives at peace. He's talking about a world where people get along, where different expressions and different colors and different genders and you name it, all the opposites, all the multiple things don't get in the way, that everybody is making it happen and just moving along the way. They're just going. Zilg more, the last two words, just walk. Walk and learn. And if you're a person who sees things graphically, you're going to see that progression from the pure upside down T right to the Bose-Einstein thing and all the others in the middle. And then on the bottom, where he starts going into hyperspace. And he kept going. He kept learning.
Right.
Same thing we started with today. It was going from the tent, and he walked out of his tent.
Yeah.
And where did he go? He walked into expression, into his hands.
Right. Yeah. So as he explored this idea of the inverted T, he found more rabbinic sources. So let's take a look at that.
And that gave me this particular triangle. Then I'm reading for the 12th time the classic of the Hasidic material in our time, the Tanya. And Tanya has an essay by the Alter Rebbe, and he says it's called, the essay's name is, this is our next poster, it's The Gate of Unity and Faith. Sure, you could, unity and faith. Well, that's a pair. What if they were corresponding to the two lines? What if unity was the vertical line and faith was the horizontal line? Is that plausible? Well, think about it. Unity is about one. It's one vertical line. It reaches up from the God point, the high point. He describes more of his features. And the word many, that could be the one and the many. The word amuna, which is translated as faith, has a root in it, which corresponds to the idea of manifold, of more than one, a group. So you have a model of the one and the many.
I'm going to stop there because the next thing he talks about is pretty cool, but I wanted to stop. So this is the Alter Rabbi.
Meir Zalman was the beginning of the Lubavitch Chabad lineage. You had the Baal Shem Tov, and you had Dober, the Maggid of Mezrich. And after 2 or 3 heads, it began to spread out. So if you were in Ger, you were the Ger Rebbe, and if you were here, you were there. Lubavitch is a place. And he was in Lubavitch, and his focus was, and his writing became Chabad. That's the
acronym.
It's not the Torah. Yeah, it's the acronym for love and strength and wisdom or insight. In other words, the mental part of the soul. But that was his view, and that was the masterwork. He had lots of other stuff that came down to us, but that's the masterwork. That's where Chabad Judaism, and it's not easy to read if you don't have a background. You're probably, if you're curious, you might get a good English translation, but you might also find a class where somebody is taking it and taking you step by step with it. But it expounds the whole the Hasidic world from a particular vantage point, and it tends to be very, I don't like the word, but intellectual rather than heartful. Like the Breslov Hasidim are more into the dancing and the singing and the really high. He's a very down to earth kind of guy. And he says, you have a tzaddik, you have a righteous guy, he's like the Rebbe is perfect, and you have the Russia, you have the bad guy, And the rest of us are all Benoni. We're all right in the middle. So take your path and read through this and see where it gets you. It's a major, major work of Chabad.
And here Stan is aligning a concept from the Tanya in geometric perspective, something that probably nobody has ever done before, and goes to the idea that if you go through many of the great writings and sages, that you're going to find that in there. It is, Daniel, you're always talking about how things are mind-blowing, and they really are in this case. Now here's another one. This one is really good. Let me go ahead and play this one.
This was written about 1800 roughly. Astronomy knew the size of the earth, knew the size of the sun. This rabbi was educated. He was writing for educated people. And he says at one point, for example, the sun, whose body is finite and limited quantitatively, being approximately 167 times the size of the globe of the earth. What? 167 times? The sun is 167 times the globe of the earth? It's not true. And there's footnotes on the page in the Tanya which attempts to rationalize this. They don't do a good job of it. We could read the quote. It is not plausible. So I'm looking at this number 167. What's 167 correspond to? Well, they're talking about globe of the earth. They didn't just say earth, they said globe. Well, that implies a sphere, a circle. And I knew from past experience, from reading for a long time, that there were two measurement systems for angles that have been in use for a very long time. We think it's modern, the radian system based on pi, and the Babylonian 360-degree angular system. And there's a relationship. Pi is 2 pi is 360 degrees as a circle, so pi corresponds to 180 degrees. And there's a lot of juggling that goes on. And sometimes when you're reading these texts, it's not clear which one they're referring to. But I've learned from experience that sometimes if I multiplied or divided by pi, I got a meaningful result. So I took 167 and divided by pi. And that gives me 53.1, give or take. The apex angle in the drawing of the triangle is 53 degrees. That's really suspicious, because that drawing, this inverted T geometry, makes sense of what the rabbi says. He also says, and I quote, "He created with it the light through the utterance, let there be light, which is the spreading forth and flow of the light from above into the world, and its diffusion in the world from one end to the other, as above, so below."
Talking about mind-blowing in terms of how those numbers worked out. I mean, this rabbi writing in the 19th century comes up with this idea, which doesn't make sense to any scientist, and Stan's looking at it, and he did this often in terms of using pi as a reference point, in terms of coming up with this stuff. And it the same as the angle on the two-dimensional version of the inverted T. How does that happen?
Who would think to do it?
Yeah.
I can divide that with a calculator. I can come up with an answer, but why would I do that? The fact that he thought to do it is mind-boggling.
Well, it seems like he had done it several times and using pi, and it ended up working for,
in terms of numerical stuff in Torah in various places. For many years, he just sort of said, gematria, most of it seems to be pretty trivial or arbitrary, and I'm not going to pay attention to it. But then eventually he started thinking, well, wait a minute. What about if I take these numbers and examine them using a framework of universal mathematical or physical constants, which would have been known, certainly pi. but which are certainly expressions of this world that we live in. You know, what if I see if there's a relationship to these mathematical and physical constants? So in fact, pi was one of the first places that he looked when he came across an intriguing number in Torah or in commentaries like Tanya. An intriguing number which might make sense or might not, you know, well, why was it there? Why was it that number? And pi was one of the things he tried. There were various other things that he would try. And as I mentioned before, I have a lot of his 3x5 cards that he used to jot these things down on. And there are plenty of them where he didn't find any relationship, but there are a lot of them where he did. So at any rate, that was one of his entry points to saying, okay, well, I can look at the numerical relationships and some of them will be interesting, starting from the framework of universal constants, which are inherent in the reality, the physical reality that we live in.
There's also, I mean, he did mention one time, I mean, it's kind of on the side, about like gematria sounds a whole lot more like geometry than mathematics. And he felt that there might have been that gematria might have started off as a form of kind of sacred geometry in the Jewish tradition, and that it kind of got lost. He mentioned he wasn't sure, but he just kind of, I remember him saying that.
What's frustrating is that I think there's enough evidence to demonstrate that this is a perspective of Torah that is real and that is solid, and that people who look at Torah as the centerpiece of Judaism, without Torah, there's no Judaism. You know, everything revolves around Torah, but it's not just the stories of Torah. This is the Sod level. I know I always pronounce that incorrectly, but it's the lower level, the foundation level. It's a structure, it's mathematical. It's probably the basis of Sefer Yetzirah, which Stan did a lot of work on and really wanted to pursue that as a translation. So it's a shame that, you know, those in the Torah world never, you know, adhere to this and recognize it, and at least looked at saying, you know, here is a perspective that maybe we should look into. It's Torah. I mean, it's a perspective. And in any case, you know, Baruch Hashem, maybe at some point the awareness will happen. I want to close this by just showing the end of this video, just so we can get a glimpse of Stan.
I learned in high school one thing you can do to test a theory is to take it to its extremes. And I replaced the sun with an infinitely bright point and the sky with an infinitely absorbing surround shield. And that is a model of the negentropic flow from Hashem to Elohim, which is modeled by our inverted T. And I realized later, as we'll go through this, that also corresponds to something of central importance in all of physics, the Dirac delta function and its transform spectrum.
But this is part of a legitimate bridge between various seemingly opposite elements in our society, whether it's between science and religion, whether it's between the secular world and the observant world. These same models also generate other sacred alphabets that came later. The Greek alphabet, the Arabic alphabet, are also generated by the same form that the beginning of the text of Genesis draws for us. So we ought to be able to show that some of these other traditions have a connection at this mathematical level, at this consciousness level, and that thereby traditions can respect each other. Now, this isn't a matter of making everybody's religion the same. Far from it. Those are totally different embodiments. We approach from different directions. But the basis, the common element in our consciousness, in our hands, literally, is what we have. and it's the alphabet. And I think that's very beautiful.
Well, I think that says it all. We've gone over, hour and 20 minutes. So I'm going to close it with that. We've had a great discussion, and there'll be more to come. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.